This episode of the Endpoints of View podcast is brought to you by SentryBay, home of the armored client, the world's most advanced endpoint protection. Okay, so anyone who's really into, the whole world of EUC and endpoint security and all that, if you were following what was happening in Miami at the Now and Next 2025 event, big event, a lot of buzz, and kind of gives a sense of where things are headed,
And it really does give you a sense of what's coming next. Yeah.
And of all the things that were talked about and all the announcements and stuff,
Right.
one really stood out, I think, to both of us.
Yeah, one really seemed to kind of rise to the top, and that was the launch of Armored Client for IGL.
Yeah.
It just seemed like a really significant announcement.
Yeah, and we wanted to do a deep dive on this topic. And we have a couple of good sources that we've been looking at. One is an interview with Manish Patel, who's the CMO at SentryBay.
Okay.
And that took place, I think, right around the time of that event in Miami.
Right.
And then also we've got some post-event analysis from Investors Hangout.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of giving us, two different perspectives. So what we want to do today is really unpack what this armored client for IGL is, why it matters so much, why people are talking about it, and what it means for security, as things are constantly changing, as the threats are changing. How do we think about endpoint security and how does this fit into that?
Yeah, so why don't we dive right in and start with a little bit of background on SentryBay itself, because I know some of our listeners may not be super familiar with them. So
SentryBay, they've been around for about 20 years. They've been doing this endpoint threat prevention thing.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things about them is that they've been recognized by Gartner in their hype cycle for all kinds of different things related to endpoint security. So, they're a serious player. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, they've got a track record there.
And they just became an IGEL-ready partner,
Mm-hmm.
which seems like a very natural fit to me. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's a perfect fit.
Yeah.
IGEL is, they're the leaders in endpoint security solutions. And SentryBay, as you said, has been focused on endpoint threat prevention.
Right.
So, this partnership, it just makes perfect sense. And Patel actually, when he was interviewed about this whole thing, he called Armored Client a game changer. And he said it really brings this proactive layer of security into the zero trust framework.
Yeah.
So that idea of being proactive, that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this game changer, this armored client for IGEL.
Yeah.
What is it exactly?
So at its core, it's a comprehensive security solution, and it's specifically designed for IGEL OS powered devices.
Okay.
And, Investors Hangout pointed out a couple of really core functionalities that I think are worth mentioning.
Sure.
The first is this OS level anti-keylogging. So rather than just, trying to find and stop keylogging malware, this actually replaces your real keystrokes with random characters at the OS level. So you can imagine how much harder that makes it for attackers to steal credentials.
Right. So even if their malware is working, they're just getting gibberish.
Exactly. And the second thing is OS level anti-screen capture. And now this isn't about blocking all screen sharing. That would really get in the way of collaboration.
Yeah.
But it gives you very granular control.
Right.
So you can share your screen with trusted apps, but you maintain that strong security posture against any unauthorized attempts to capture what's on your screen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because there's some things you want to share and some things you don't want to share.
Exactly. And that selective control is really important.
And this is part of the IGEL Ready program.
Yeah.
So what does that really mean for organizations?
So IGEL Ready basically means that it's been tested, it's been verified to integrate seamlessly with IGEL OS.
So it's going to work.
It's going to work. Exactly.
You don't have to worry about compatibility issues.
Exactly. And deployment is streamlined.
Yeah. So this all sounds great, but let's talk about the benefits.
Okay.
What are the actual real-world benefits of implementing this for an organization?
So the benefits are pretty significant.
Yeah.
First of all, it really enhances security across all your IGL endpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that Investors Hangout really emphasize. They're really excited about that because it creates a unified security layer.
Right.
So it's easier to manage, and it provides a more robust defense across all the devices on your network.
So it's not just about, protecting your data, which is obviously incredibly important.
Right.
But it's also about reinforcing the credibility of your whole digital infrastructure.
Exactly. And that's a really important point.
And Patel really stressed this idea of being proactive.
He did.
Yeah.
And that's so important,
Yeah.
Especially these days when you think about all the threats out there, the zero-day attacks, the AI-driven polymorphic malware.
Yeah, these things are really scary.
They're really scary. And traditional methods often struggle against these kinds of threats because they're looking for known threats.
Right.
but this is different. Armored Client operates at the OS level, and it uses these obfuscation techniques against keylogging and screen capture, so it can actually neutralize these brand new threats by stopping them from doing what they're trying to do in the first place.
So it's not just about, identifying the bad guys. It's about making it impossible for them to actually get what they want.
Exactly. It's about prevention.
And Patel specifically mentioned that it blocks keylogger threats, screen capture malware, and it even helps mitigate insider threats.
That's right, because it stops unauthorized capture of credentials and sensitive data at the OS level. So it's just closing off those attack pathways, whether the threat is coming from outside or from inside the organization.
So how easy is it to implement this thing?
Well, according to Investors Hangout, it's really efficient.
Okay.
It integrates with the IGEL Universal Management Suite, or UMS.
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of organizations using IGEL are already familiar with.
Right. So it makes the initial setup and the ongoing administration really easy.
And it's also available through the IGEL app portal, right?
Yeah.
What's the advantage of that?
So that really streamlines everything, from initial access and deployment to updates. And it really contributes to a better digital experience for your users.
Yeah, security shouldn't be a burden.
Exactly.
It should just work in the background.
Right.
So let's look ahead a little bit. As we move further into 2025, the threats are constantly evolving. So what is SentryBay anticipating, and how is Armored Client going to address those challenges?
Well, Patel highlighted a few things that they're really concerned about. One is the rise of these AI-driven cyber threats.
Right.
Another is the continued problem of zero-day exploits. And then the ongoing risk of insider attacks.
Yeah.
And he said that Armored Client is specifically designed to deal with these threats.
Okay, so let's take those one by one.
Okay.
How does it neutralize endpoint exploits?
So it does this through its advanced data obfuscation techniques.
Particularly the keystroke randomization.
Right.
And the screen capture control. So even if an attacker manages to exploit a vulnerability, they can't get the information they want.
They can't actually do anything.
Exactly. They're blocked.
What about the AI-generated malware? I mean, that sounds especially difficult to deal with.
It is, but Armored Client operates at the OS level.
Yeah.
And it intercepts the actual malicious actions, so it doesn't need to recognize a specific piece of malware. Even if the AI generates something totally new that's never been seen before,
Right.
Armored Client can still protect you because it's preventing the technique, not just identifying a particular tool.
That's a really important point.
It is.
So it's not just about updating your signature database constantly.
Right.
It's about a more fundamental level of protection.
Exactly.
And how does it help with those zero-day exploits?
So because it operates at the system level
Mm-hmm.
and it focuses on preventing those malicious actions no matter what the specific exploit is,
Right.
it provides a really strong defense against zero-day vulnerabilities.
Okay.
So it doesn't even need to know about the vulnerability to protect you.
So for organizations that are using VDI days and SaaS environments, how does this integrate?
It integrates seamlessly,
Okay.
and it provides that consistent enterprise-grade protection across all your digital workspaces.
So whether your stuff is on premises or in the cloud or you're accessing it through a virtual desktop, you're protected.
Exactly.
So for SentryBay, it sounds like this event in Miami was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it was their first time sponsoring the event.
Okay.
And Patel said it was a really rewarding and insightful experience for them.
And they were showing off Armored Client at their booth.
Yeah, booth N6.
And what were they really trying to get across to the people who stopped by?
Well, they wanted to show people the difference between the traditional reactive way of doing security and this proactive approach of eliminating threats before they can do any damage. And they had three main messages that they really wanted to emphasize. One is that Armored Client gives you continuous protection against these evolving threats that we've been talking about.
Right.
The second is that it provides the kind of enterprise-grade security that you need to meet compliance requirements. And the third is that it delivers uncompromising endpoint security, so your critical assets are protected.
So bottom line, if you're worried about securing endpoints, especially with all the remote and hybrid work that's happening these days and the threat of data breaches,
Right.
it sounds like this is something that you should really look into.
It is. It's definitely worth exploring further.
So to sum up, the launch of Armored Client for IGEL at the Now and Next event in Miami is a really big deal.
It is.
It's a major step forward in endpoint security.
Yeah.
And this proactive approach that focuses on preventing malicious actions at the OS level, that's a big change.
Right.
And it's really well integrated into the IGEL ecosystem. So it's a really compelling solution for organizations that are trying to improve their security.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think, as these AI-powered threats keep getting more sophisticated and harder to stop, how important are these proactive kernel-level security solutions like Armored Client going to become?
That's a great question.
It is something to think about what are the implications for your organization, for your specific security challenges?
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And if you want to learn more about this, we encourage you to go check out IGEL and SentryBay. Get more information about their partnership and about this armored client solution.
Right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode of the Endpoints of View podcast has been brought to you by SentryBay, home of the armored client, the world's most advanced endpoint protection. For more information, visit sentrybay.com.